We're talking about trust today, which is seemingly a bigger and bigger issue as we see teams that are struggling, people leaving their jobs, leaving poor leadership, leaving toxic companies. And so it's more important than ever to talk about how high-performing teams achieve those high levels of trust.
Agreed. Well, there's a lot of things we have to consider, and some of it's historic. Our nation over-indexed on rugged individualism. Over the past 20, 30, 40 years in business, you see sort of incentive structures are almost entirely, in our companies, almost every single incentive is based on an individual performance. There's no such thing as team performance or group performance. We're literally not incentivized to help each other. We're incentivized to hoard information and keep it from each other. And so it really requires fantastic leadership to keep a team together. And that's the other thing that's been lagging, which is in too many companies, we don't see leadership taught. Our companies generally do a pretty good job of teaching us the skills we need to do our jobs. And most companies do a pretty poor job of teaching us the skills we need to do, to trust, to lead, to take care of each other. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here in almost every single company of almost every single size, in almost every single category.
Yeah. Well, we say around here, business moves at the speed of trust. And if your team lacks that trust, it can erode not only the success of your team, but your business itself. So how have you seen that play out with companies you've either watched or worked with?
Well, I mean, yes, and yes. I mean, it's kind of silly that we're having this conversation, isn't it? It's like everybody knows you can't have a relationship. You can't have a romantic relationship without trust. So why are we having a conversation that you can't have a successful business without trust? It's human beings interacting with human beings. It's, again, you can't have friends without trust. So I think it's hilarious that we're talking about this like it's a big idea. I will point out one very sort of what I find ironic realization, which is, I stand on the stage, I write books, I talk about trusting teams, I talk about high-performing teams. I'll use various examples, including sort of SEAL teams, which are considered some of the highest performing teams on the planet. And I talk about how they value trust over performance. If you consider, I once asked the head of training for the SEALs, how do you choose who moves up through the ranks, kind of thing. And he drew a graph. On the vertical axis was performance, and on the horizontal axis was trust. Clearly, nobody wants the low performer of low trust, right? And performance is defined by how good are you at your job. Trust is defined as what kind of person are you, right? Clearly, nobody wants the low performer of low trust. Clearly, everybody wants the high performer of high trust. Clearly, what they learned is that the high performer of low trust is a toxic team member. And they would rather have a medium performer of high trust, sometimes even a low performer of high trust, it's a relative scale, over a high performer of low trust.
Wow.
And if you think about it, if you put a high performer of low trust in a job and the company only rewards performance, then eventually that high performer of low trust, who's a toxic team member, becomes a toxic leader. And again, we have a million metrics to measure performance, but we have minimal to no metrics to measure trust. And so we have a lot of toxic geniuses on our teams, these high performers of low trust, and very often leadership knows about it. And when somebody says, that person is really doing a lot of damage to your culture, and they go, I know, but their performance is so good,
They love the revenue.
They love the revenue. So the accountability actually lies with the leader. They're willing to look past some of these very human indiscretions, these things that destroy trust, selfishness, hoarding information, overbearingness, bullying, whatever it is, because somebody's performance is good. And it'll always bite you in the ass, because that high performer of low trust doesn't care about you. They care about themselves. And if they get a better job offer, if they have an opportunity, they'll bail ship in 2 minutes, and you're left holding the bag. It's really easy to find these people. Just go to any team and ask them who the asshole is, and they'll all point to the same person. They'll all tell you. And this doesn't mean that they should be fired, by the way. This means that they should be coached. I believe someone should be asked to leave the team and join another company if they prove themselves to be uncoachable. Just because somebody is a high performer of low trust, they still may have blind spots. If we bring these things to them in a constructive way, they may go, oh my goodness, I had no idea. It's possible. How coachable are they? Same with our low performers. They have to be coachable. And by the way, it's also easy to find those high trust members. Just go to the same team and say, hey, who do you trust more than anybody else, especially when the chips are down? They'll also all point to the same person. That's the most gifted natural leader you have and may not be your highest individual performer, but they are capable of raising the performance of everybody else because they're such high trust members. Not to beat this horse to death, but one of the things that I find so interesting is I talk about these things. I talk about these high-performing teams. I talk about these groups. And what I've seen in companies is that they hear what I say, and then they try to take that stuff and attribute it to a person. I'm talking about high-performing teams, and you're trying to make high-performing individuals out of the information that I'm talking and writing about, right? Almost everything that I write about is about teams. And yet we aren't trying to build teams. We're trying to build great individuals. So I think we need to get back to teamwork.